I love your theme that you've had this summer and centering on Jesus. And my subject this evening is about Jesus, the light of the world. I thought I really can't inform you a great deal about it. It's just a marvelous thing. I think most of us who attend a Wednesday evening Bible study, most of us who are churchgoers, most of us who read the Bible, most of us who have any association with God or with His Son Jesus Christ at all, look at that and say, why, of course, Jesus is the light of the world. Everybody knows that. Now then, let's think about it a little bit. Where did we get that? Jesus, the light of the world. In fact, if you get into Matthew 5, Jesus says, you are the light of the world. Well, there's some background to that, and maybe we'll mention a little bit about that in just a moment. But the idea of Jesus being the light of the world is brought to our attention, especially in the 8th chapter of John. In John chapter 8, we find a great story that is taking place there. And as Jesus brings that story, or we bring that story to conclusion, Jesus deals with what He has to deal with there. We come down to a point, and Jesus speaks to those who are round about, and He tells them in verse 12 that He is the light of the world. It says, then Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Great statement. You got to love it. I got to love it. But let's kind of break this down just a little bit. Let's think together on this one for just a moment. Let's think about the idea of why He would use the phraseology, I'm the light of the world, and why use the idea of light at all? Well, it's kind of one of those things you say, when you hear it, it's obvious, you understand it. But let's think about it just a moment. Maybe some of you have children in your house. We have children again in our house. You know, when you got 6 grandchildren running around and you got one on the way, there'll be 7 in January, and if an adoption goes through, who knows, we might have 8 by January. They're just multiplying. I would have thought there were rabbits around there or something, these grandchildren just multiplying all over the place. But because there are children in the house, you know what else there is in the house? There are toys in the house. And I can still remember, and some of you who've had small children in your house, you can remember when, well, there were children and there were toys, and toys were not always put where they belonged. Maybe you had the perfect house. We didn't. I don't care how hard we tried, but there were always toys that were left in one place or another. Anyway, if there are children in the house and there are toys, occasionally one or more of those toys is out of place during the night, and it will probably be on the night that one of the children calls out in the night. You know where this is going, don't you? And you hear that call in the night, Daddy! And you rise up out of bed and you think, I've got to make it. And you head toward that child's room in the night. And do you turn on the light? Why, no, because my wife is over there sleeping peacefully and I wouldn't want her bothered. Right. But you don't turn on the light. You don't put on the house slippers. You just get up and you start walking. And you walk through the darkness of the night into the next room, and your eyes are blurry as it is. And about halfway across that child's room, there it is. I don't care what it is, it's going to hurt in the night. One of the things that I know for a fact is that Legos are terrible on your feet at night. And toy airplanes are almost as bad. You know what I'm talking about. Because where there is darkness, scattered toys, and bare feet, there's the potential for injury and at least some pain. And there may be anger and there may be frustration because of what happened. But you know what? It's about the darkness. You just couldn't see it. You didn't know it was there. You didn't think about it being there because you couldn't see it. It wasn't visible to you. And so you go across and you step on it and it hurts. Now, you might have gone along and not stepped on it. You might have made it to the child's bed without stepping on it. It could have happened. But chances are you're going to hit it and it's going to hurt. Well, I want you to think about that in the light, well, there's the word again, in the association with the idea of how important light is to us and Jesus associating Himself with the light. That's really what we're getting at this evening. It says in Genesis 1 through 5, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. I hope you caught that in there. I hope you caught that statement that the light was good. Generally, I think we all agree with the Lord. The light is good. So even if we agree that light is good, there's still another point for our lesson, and for the sake of what we're doing here this evening. Jesus calls Himself the light of the world. Twice in close context here, Jesus refers to being the light. You get a little bit later, He still refers to Himself as being the light. It appears to me that when He says it, we ought to consider carefully what it means. And when He says it more than once, we ought to come to know exactly what He means by that. I think you know what I'm saying. So let's think on it for the next few minutes. We've got Jesus as the light of the world. So let's go back to Jesus is. That's our subject this evening. Jesus is. If somebody said to you, Jesus is, what is He? What is He? Well, there are a lot of things we can put in there, aren't there? Let's think about a few. Jesus is the Son of God. That's the first and easiest one, isn't it? Jesus is the Son of God. We listen to Peter. Matthew 16:16. Who do you say that I am? Jesus said, and Peter responds, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." It's not the only time he says it. John 6 as well. But even without looking at all the Old Testament prophecies leading up to it, pointing towards it and things like that, we still hear that statement. And we join it together with an even bigger statement. For you may well remember that when Jesus went to John to be baptized of John, overcoming John's hesitancy to do so, John baptized him. When he comes up, you remember what happened. Heavens opened, so forth, Spirit descended, the voice from heaven. What did it say? You know what it said. You've heard it before. "This is my beloved Son." Who is it? Son of God. That's first. Jesus is Son of God. That ought to be enough by itself, but let's go a little further. If we're going to think about Jesus is a lot of things, but Jesus is also good news. In spite of the way some would think about it, Jesus is good news. He Himself makes clear He did not come to take away from people, but He came to give to people. In fact, in John 10, He says there were others that came to steal, to break in and steal. He said, "I didn't do that. The Good Shepherd doesn't do that." That's John 10. In verse 10, He said, "I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly." What did He do? He came to give. He came to give life, and He came to give it abundantly. That's good news. That's the word gospel that we use all the time. He came to bring life and not to take from life. And He sent others, especially those close disciples of His, He sent others with the message of good news. When He sent on what we sometimes call a limited commission in Matthew chapter 10, because it was only to certain peoples, He sent them out and He told them, "Tell them the kingdom of heaven is at hand." As much as anything, that was intended to be good news. Something they were looking for, something they were hoping for. And Jesus says the time is here. And when we come to what we call the Great Commission, Mark's account of it, he says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel." Like we said, that word gospel, what does it mean? Preach the good news. What are you going to tell them? "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved." That's good news. He sent others with good news. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is good news. Jesus is then opportunity. That's also good news, but He's opportunity. When He came by the seashore in Mark chapter 1, as well as Matthew 3, when He came by the seashore and He saw those fishermen out there, He says, "Follow me, And I will make you to become fishers of men. He was calling them to a higher level. He was lifting them up, but He was calling them, and they had the opportunity. That's the word. They had the opportunity to respond to Him. It was their choice. And the others that followed right after that, it was their choice to leave what they were doing. It was their choice to put down their nets. It was their choice to follow Him. And as with any choice, if one thing is taken, another is left behind. We choose one course in life, something else is left behind. Jesus said, I know what you're doing now, but I'm going to help you do something else if you're willing. Opportunity is Jesus. Let me give you one more, because I think this one is so important. Jesus is the one with the words of life. I mentioned John 6 a little while ago. If you read through that story where Jesus feeds the thousands and then, of course, sends the disciples across the sea, separates Himself from them, goes off. Then later He comes out walking to the water, joins those disciples, gets in the boat. They go on across. Other people start looking for Him. They come around. They find Jesus there. They come up to Him and say, we've been looking for you. Jesus gives them some pretty straightforward teaching at that point. And many of them, it says in verse 66 of John 6, went away and followed Him no more. That's a sad statement. It's one of those truly sad statements in the Scripture. But in response to that, Jesus turns to His closest disciples, those among the 12, and He looks at them and He says, will you also go away? Did you ever put yourself in that place? I know it's kind of beside the point for a moment, but did you ever put yourself in the place of those men? When everybody else is walking away, when everyone else is going somewhere else, when everyone else is leaving, when those are looking at Him, and they're still, and even these 12 are wondering, what in the world is He telling us? Did you ever put yourself in the place of them when He turns around and He says, will you also go away? Can you catch yourself saying, well, Lord, I just don't know. I don't know. But you got to love the response. You got to love the response. Peter, again, especially, responds. Verse 68, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. And we've come to believe you're the Christ of God, the one with the words of life. He is the opportunity. He is these things we're talking about. Jesus is. When we look at it in Jesus, I am the light of the world, we can associate Jesus is many things. And it helps us to understand when He says, I am the light of the world, what is He talking about? He is saying, I am many things to people, and it's summed up in this word light, but we talk about light. So let's say light is. Let's use that word. Light is. Do you ever stop to think what light is? The other day I was talking about a little bit about light somewhere in class or something, and I said, well, it's usually because of electricity flowing through a filament in a bulb, and then I stopped and I realized, well, wait a minute, that's getting kind of old school now, isn't it? That's what we typically think about light. You know, I go walking in the early morning before the sun's up in the morning. I just want everybody to know that I get up early and say, boy, what a great guy he is. But no, seriously, I go walking usually before it gets light. But you know, my neighborhood is not dark. It's not dark in my neighborhood. I walk 2 or 3 miles in my neighborhood and there are just very few dark places. You know why? Because people have lights on everywhere. Yard lights, porch lights. There are lights everywhere. There are street lights. You can see down the street. Maybe not as bright as daylight, but you can see just about anywhere throughout the neighborhood. We like light. And there are qualities in light that make it good. Light is good because of the qualities that we see in it. Let me offer to you a few of those this evening. I take a little different track on this than I probably would have a few weeks ago, but I hope it makes sense to you when we get done. Because Jesus is these things. Now we say light is. What does light do? Light makes things clear, reveals them to us. It's clarifying and revealing. We understand that light shows us what we cannot see in the dark. It reveals to us. I remember quite a few years ago, I had a friend at the Drexel congregation. He was an extremely old man then, 72 years old, and I was a young man, right around 30 at the time. Anyway, he was a great guy and a very good friend. I make fun. He's long deceased now. But we were working on a car together. And he said, oh, it just aggravates me. He said, I can't see that bolt down there. We need more light in there. I said, but it's right there. He said, I can't see it. It's too dark down there. And I said, it's right there. And he said, I can't see it. It's too dark down there. That's when I began to realize that light is pretty important. And the older we get, the more light we need to see a lot of things. But it reveals. And you know what? Held the trouble light down there. You could see that bolt just fine when you put the light on it. You know how it is. It's pretty simple. Nothing all that hard to understand about it, but it's pretty important, isn't it? Light reveals, and that becomes pretty important. If you question how important that is, go back to Genesis chapter 29 and verse 25. Put yourself in the place of a fellow by the name of Jacob when he woke up after the night in the daylight, and he looks, and he had married a different woman than he thought he had married. Light can be pretty revealing. That's the way it works. Yeah, they didn't have street lights and porch lights then. I was also thinking today about an occasion back when I was a student in school a long time ago. And some of the dormitories form a quadrangle. And usually there's quite a bit of light in that quadrangle because they don't want boys getting into trouble down into that quadrangle on the campus and all. But every now and then somebody would knock out some of the lights and there wasn't much light down in there. And so one night, I'd probably been at the library studying till late. Yeah, right. Anyway, I was walking diagonally across the quadrangle on the sidewalk, and it was kind of dark down in there. And I looked and I saw an animal. And so I said, oh, there's a cat down here, a little dark cat down there. And so I thought, well, and I said, well, come here, kitty. And I started to reach over and pet that cat. And about that time, it made some sort of noise and kind of went off in this direction, and as it did, it went through some light, and I realized the cat that I was about to pet had a white streak down its back. Wasn't a cat, by the way. And I was lucky that night. But the light reveals, doesn't it? It makes clear what you don't see in the darkness. Sometimes we feel confident. Sometimes we feel safe. Sometimes we think things are a certain way in the darkness, but they're not. But light clarifies and reveals. Light also, one of the great things light does is color defining. Do you know without light we don't have color? Color is something for our eyes. I don't know exactly how to explain it all and understand it all, but without light we don't see color. We may feel, we may smell, we may taste, we may hear, but without light we cannot recognize color because that's a production in a way of the way light works for us. I was thinking about, and somebody got me to read the book, The Giver, or part of it. I haven't read all of it yet, and so pardon me even using something I haven't completely read yet. Got me to reading the book, The Giver, that mostly young people read, but one of my kids wanted me to read it. So I was reading the book, and something that struck me in the book, if you've read it or I don't know whether the movie is out yet or not. I don't get to too many movies. But anyway, maybe you've seen it, and I'm not sure it's exactly the book. But in the book, the people had decided to live life by what they called sameness. And one of the things that they gave up was color. People no longer knew even what color was. Everything was just, I don't know, just kind of plain. And a young man that is to fill a certain position comes to begin to realize what color is. And he asks the older gentleman who's helping him along the way about it because he can't fathom why anyone would want to give up color. Wow. You remember when we went from black and white television to color? Some of you are that old, I know. Because I see you, I know you are. You remember too, don't you? It was amazing, wasn't it? When you could go to color television. It was like going to the movies right there in your home. Long before high definition, long before these big screens, long before any of that, long before 3D, we looked in our televisions and their small screens maybe, and we saw that color and it was amazing. We love color. Light gives us the opportunity to appreciate color. Light is color defining. Without it, we don't see light. Light is also the thing that helps us know about danger and about safety. You know, it's not an accident. It's not by accident that we put the headlights on the front of the car and not on the rear. Do you ever think about that? No, because you didn't need to. That's kind of foolish, isn't it? It's not by accident we put the headlights on the front of the car. Moving forward, we want to be able to see, and if it's not sunlight outside, we need to be able to see, and we put lights out there so that we can see, because you know what? If you drive around, and some of you can do that tonight, but wait till I get home. You can turn off the lights on your car if it's after dark, and you start trying to drive home. Now, we got enough lights in our towns around about here. You might be able to see and get by, but you're not going to see nearly as well as you will, and you're not going to notice some of the things that are along the way if you don't have the lights on. Pretty simple, isn't it? Jesus is trying to tell us something, and light comes into play in it. I don't know that I've, outside of one or two times in my life, ever known what it was to really be fully in the dark. I remember when I was about 10, 11 years old, my grandparents, my mother, and some others, we went down to Sonora, Texas, to the caverns of Sonora, down near Sonora, Texas. Maybe some of you have been there. I haven't ever been back. But I remember that was the first time I'd ever been in a cavern. And we went down in there, and there was a place where you go down the steps around, and there's a railing there, of course. And you come down to a certain point, and the tour guide says, okay, everyone grab hold of the railing. And the tour guide has a rock in his hand. He says, everyone grab hold of the railing. And we stand there holding onto the railing. And he says, because I'm going to turn off the lights. And the lights went out. And for a little bit you could see in your mind's eye that picture of the light bulb still, but you couldn't see anything else. And the tour guide could speak, and you knew the direction the tour guide was coming from. But between us and the tour guide, as we circled around this cavern, there was a great big hole. The tour guide said, listen, I'm going to drop a rock now. And he dropped a rock, and we waited. And it seemed like, as a child, it seemed like forever until we finally heard that rock hit the bottom. And the tour guide had the lights turned back on and said, if we didn't have the lights in here, you might fall like that rock in that hole. It's crazy, isn't it? We need light for our safety. We need light to see where we are going. We need light to identify our safety or danger that's in our way. And one more thing about light, light is sensory gratifying. That's the terminology I use. Consider how much appeal is associated because light allows our eyes to see. I mean, we're attracted to people a lot because of the way they look. We care about the way we look, and people look at us. We wear collars and shapes. We even sometimes comb our hair and fix ourselves up as best we can. Some of us don't have much to work with, but we do the best we can because we understand the idea of sight and light and sensory gratification that makes us feel good. We look at things and we say, that's beautiful. We look into the sky at night and we see the stars and we say, that's marvelous. We see the clouds roll in and we hope it rains. We look and we see a thunderstorm and we're amazed at the magnificence of the power and the rolling clouds and all of those things. There is a sensory gratification in us that is associated with light and being able to see. Jesus said, I am the light of the world, clarifying, revealing, and in a sense color defining, giving a clarity that's there, helping us to associate and understand danger and safety, and satisfying the sense of knowing who and whose we are, what is good and what is right, knowing where we are and where we are going. Think about those descriptions from Genesis 1. Think about those descriptions before there was light in the world. The earth was without form. I don't know exactly what is meant by this. I don't know Hebrew language. Somebody might be able to explain it better to you, but I get the idea it didn't have any appeal to it. It was without form. It was void. It was empty in a sense. And there was darkness on the face of the deep. And that's when I keep thinking about that cavern of Sonora. Darkness on the face of the deep. Before there was light in the world. No wonder when God said, let there be light, and there was light, and He separated the light from the darkness. He could look at it and He'd say, He saw the light and it was good. So let's come back. Let's come back to Jesus' statement. Let's come back to looking at it, because Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is the light of the world, and that is a draw to us. That's intended to be a draw. Jesus is trying to point that out. You know, He tells us in John 12, said, and if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself. There is not a drawing power in a cross by itself. A cross is not a drawing power. A cross is a death instrument. Even when Jesus calls on us to take up our cross and follow Him, it's not an attractive thing. But when we put a light on that cross, when we put someone special on that cross, when we put the one who has the words of life on there, when we put the power of His blood on that cross, that light that is on that cross makes the cross a drawing power to all mankind. Think about it. What is it that draws us? You see, we're just like bugs in the summertime attracted to light. You turn on your porch light and the bugs come a-flying. Because we are aware of light. And we are designed, just like in the beginning, just like the description there, that God looks on it and it is good. We are designed to be attracted to light. If we weren't to be attracted to light, He wouldn't have given us the eyes. You know, there are creatures in the depths of the ocean. There are creatures in the depths of the ocean that do not see. They don't have eyes like we've got. They don't need to see. There's no light for them to see. But God designed us with eyes. And if your eye is good, the body is full of light. So when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, He's talking about a drawing power that has an influence and a very special effect on you and on me. That means there is a contrast that exists in Jesus. As God separates the light from the darkness, there is a contrast between Jesus and other things that are in the world. When we read that they talk about those people, when Gamaliel in Acts chapter 5 talks about those who had come before and tried to proclaim that they were something, he says they came to nothing. But Jesus is different. There is a contrast in Jesus. Go back to where we began in John chapter 8. In the 8th chapter of John, we have a woman that is brought to Jesus. Some very observant people see this woman, recognize who she is and what she is doing, and they bring the woman to Jesus. They bring to Him this woman caught in adultery. And they want to condemn her. As they brought the adulterous woman to Jesus, we recognize a real contrast between Jesus and others. For you may note while they are there, figuratively and maybe literally with rocks in their hands, ready to drag the woman out and put her to death, when Jesus looks on the woman, you remember what He says as He speaks to the crowd. Let him who is without sin cast the stone at her first. Nobody threw any rocks that day. And when Jesus looks at the woman again, He says, where are your accusers? She says, I have none. He says, neither do I condemn you. He does say, go and sin no more. Don't practice sin anymore. We see a difference in Jesus. We see a contrast in Jesus, and that is the attraction. That's the light that we were talking about. Because in Him we are able to look upon ourselves and see ourselves clearly. We are able to see ourselves clearly in the present. We're able to look at ourselves and recognize who we are and whose we are clearly in the present. Because our real circumstances are undeniable. We can't hide our faces. We can't put our heads in the sand figuratively or literally. Our real circumstances are undeniable. Like this woman who came to Jesus, or was brought to Jesus, her circumstances were undeniable. It was made clear who she was. And the others who were there, who thought so much of themselves and their position in the presence of Jesus, had to see themselves. But not only do we see ourselves, or should we see ourselves clearly where we are in the light of Jesus, we can, in the light of Jesus, see where we are going. As Paul writes to the church in Corinth, he offers the idea there that we walk in what light we have. We walk as far as the light shows. But you know, every step you take with the light in you that is of Him, it just takes it a little further down the road. But what His light does for us, it allows us to see where we are going. It gives us a certainty of the future that no one else can give us. You know, you can call Warren Buffett up on the phone and ask him what you should invest in, but you know he can't guarantee it. He's not going to tell you anyway, but you can't guarantee it. But Jesus can. Where are we going? Who offers the certainty about the future? It's not a wonder that rich young man came running to Jesus with the question, what good thing might I do to inherit eternal life? It's not a wonder he came with that question to Jesus. Of course, when Jesus gave him the answer, he didn't really like it. But who else? For even as he walks away, remember what the disciples asked Jesus? Not only who then can be saved, and Jesus responds, with men it is impossible, with God all things are possible. Notice the comment that is made, Lord, we have left all and followed you. What then shall we have? Jesus goes on, you're going to be rewarded. You're rewarded in this life and you're rewarded in the life to come. We can know where we're going. That's why John could write later in the 5th chapter of 1 John and say, I've written these things to you. Why? In part to know that you have life. There's a certainty that's in Him. In Him, we are able to see ourselves clearly in the present, and we're able to see where we are going very clearly. There is not a Christian alive who shouldn't be able to look at his life or her life and say, because of Jesus, in the light that He has given me, I know where I'm going. I know to whom I belong. I know, and I know where I'm going. So let me see if I can't wrap this all up. Bound to be running out of time. Probably ran over by 20, 30 minutes or so. I still got 15 minutes. I got 10 minutes? Man, oh man. That never happened. No, I'm good. We're good. I just wanted to help them along the way. I want you to think about this, that it shouldn't slip past us. That as Jesus looked at His listeners, and there on the mountainside called to them and said, you're the salt of the earth, and you're the light of the world. And we center on the second one, you're the light of the world. City on a hill, not something you don't light it, put it under the basket or the bushel as we teach our children and so forth. As He called to them, He referred to them as the light of the world. You know, if you just take something like that at face value, we begin to think pretty highly of ourselves. You know, preachers are blessed. They are blessed. Because people walk up to them and shake their hands and tell them how wonderful they are. I mean, we might joke and say mean things every now and then, but they walk out the doors, and the nicest ladies will walk out the door and tell you how great you are and how wonderful you are. Oh, it's great, great lesson. You can go home saying, I am the greatest thing in the world. Of course, every preacher needs to ask his wife, because she'll tell him the truth. But Jesus said, you're the light of the world. We can get pretty elevated in our thinking about ourselves. Any of us. We're the light of the world. They may have thought, we're God's people. We've got God's love. We're the light of the world. That wasn't what He was saying. He was saying, because of God's work, you have an opportunity to shine to the world. We need to know that it is the light that is recognized. When we are the light of the world, it's not something that generates from us. It's not something that generates because of how good we are. It's not something that generates because we have been chosen special, but because we have accepted what is special. We need to know that it is the light that is recognized. And it is recognized by what is done and what it does in us and through us. You see what light does? It's what darkness doesn't do. Darkness doesn't do anything that's good. In fact, in John 3 and verse 19, Jesus talks about the condemnation that's come into the world because light has come into the world, he said. But men love the darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. That means contrary to God. Light does what darkness doesn't do. That's why Jesus would say, let your light shine, yes? That men might see what? Your good works. What are people going to see? Your works. But the question is, are they going to be good works? Let your light shine that they might see your good works. If people see it, there's going to be a difference. There's going to be a contrast. As we look at Jesus, we recognize that they will see in us the Son of God. They will see in us the good news of what He has done. They will see in us an opportunity to be and to do something. They will see in us the value of the words of life. They will see in us that there is a clarifying and revealing nature. They will see in us the real color of life that exists. They will see in us the knowledge of where safety really exists. They will see in us the joy that comes out of knowing who and whose we are that brings about a gratification in our lives. Light does what darkness cannot do. We may close our eyes in the darkness and we may shut out the world, but we cannot have in the darkness. We have what we need and can have in the light. The fact is we can. We can linger. We can linger afraid, or we can just hesitate and stay in darkness. I don't think you do or want to because you're here. Or we can be drawn to the light. Listen to these words, Ephesians 5, beginning at verse 8. For you were once in darkness, but now you are, this is what Jesus was talking about, you are light in the Lord. Paul says, walk as children of light, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. So let's go back to the very beginning. Jesus said to those who were there on that occasion, I am the light of the world. To us, he says, you are the light of the world. But our light of the world is only by what we have from the light in the Lord. And it only shines when we avoid the works of darkness. Jesus has given us so very much. When I thought about this lesson, I thought about so many things we could say about Jesus. So many things that are so positive and great. He is the light of the world, and so many. We can talk about His sacrifice. We can talk about His blood. We can talk about His teaching. We can talk about His continuation. We can talk that He is always with us. We can talk about His intercessory nature. We can talk about so many things, and those are all great and marvelous lessons. But I thought I just want to center on the idea of light and how valuable, how valid it is, and how we think about it. And if we recognize it in Jesus, then it is that truly drawing power that brings us closer to Him. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. That's the drawing power to the very best. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you, to spend some time with this and to think on this. I hope it's something that encourages your thinking. I don't think I told you anything new this evening, but hopefully we said it together, we shared it together, and it brings about something great in our thinking about who and what He is and what He has done for us and is doing through us.